Haha! Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Orange Monday. Not Orange Wednesday, Orange Monday now. Just without the free movie tickets or 2-for-1 movie tickets from Orange. Obviously, as you all know, 6 o'clock, bizarre random time, but I think everyone else is streaming at the same time. However, do enjoy watching us on catch up or anything like that. Like I say, all the good stuff. I'm being joined today by, of course, Graham. Everyone knows Graham from Politics Social, etc. And today, we're joined by a very special guest. Believe it or not, my uncle, I'll take it away. Why, of course, you're here and your experience really in London to explain some of this stuff that's going on, really, before we get into it. So, give us a bit of your experience before we begin.
Just being in London doesn't qualify you to talk about this stuff, right? But for my sins, I spent 40 years working in banking and the last 22 working in treasury management, and spent a good 12 years with Lloyds Banking Group, finally as head of debt investor relations, and went through a period there where I saw the end-to-end consequences of the banking crisis, amongst other things. So it was a terrific experience, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in every area, but then the city is very, very sophisticated and specialised, and at the end of the day, nobody is really an expert in every area. But I think I may have something to add, hopefully.
Cool, excellent. So I suppose, like I say, if you've got questions or anything that comes up, like I say, please put them in the chat, and like I say, we'll put them forward. But like I say, I'm pretty sure both of you today were expecting, surprised, not shocked, surprised by the opening, by the FTSE 100 this morning.
It was a little bit of a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
This really, you think of economics, you think, oh, there's a Nobel Prize for that. It must be really complicated. What Trump's done, it's not complicated. It's like going into the supermarket and saying, you're not charging me enough for this stuff. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, you don't buy anything off me, so I want to pay more for the things. And they're like, what? That's it in a nutshell. Make us pay more, says America, for your products.
I mean, there are some oddities about this, because there were some YouTube videos doing the rounds probably a couple of weeks ago where people were trying to say to American citizens, well, hang on, guys, Trump's put these tariffs on these goods. You're going to have to pay for it. Yeah. Right. And on the face of it, that's exactly what he's done. But what you've got to understand is that economics very often is about behavior. And what he's trying to do in part is to persuade people to buy US goods over imported foreign goods. So there's this conundrum where we're seeing reports in the press about how, Trump can raise $700 billion and give everyone in the US a reduction in their taxes. Well, that's fine if everybody continues to export the same quantity of goods into the US, ignores the tariffs. The man in the street, the man in New York continues to pay and now a much higher rate for those goods, and then the money's in the coffers that Trump can go and give the money back in taxes. Well, that's not how it's going to work. It's going to work because Scotch whiskey now costs a lot more than Kentucky bourbon. So what are you going to drink? Kentucky bourbon. So he's trying to bring jobs back into the US in part for this. What we've seen in the last few years in terms of low tariffs and shall we say global free trade, is that companies have done what companies do. They've found the cheapest place to go and make something.
Yeah.
They've gone, 2016, they were in China. So he put tariffs in 2016 in China. So the companies moved to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. He's got wise to that this time. So he's put tariffs on Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, quite severe ones. He's trying to move and bring, shall we say, production back into the US to create jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's be honest about this. As a consumer, when you're spending probably about £1,000 for a decent Apple iPhone, and that's £1,000 because the parts are made in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and imported into the US, and therefore Apple iPhone have got to put up the prices on the iPhone because they've either got a tariff to pay, and this takes time. So in the short term, they're paying the tariff. In the medium to longer term, they've got to bring these jobs back into the US. Now, good old Uncle Buck, is he going to want to be paid the same money that a guy in Cambodia gets paid for doing the same job? I'll leave you to think about that one. The answer is no. He wants to be paid a proper wage, which of course is what Trump's after. But then what does that do to the price of your Apple iPhone?
Yeah, upwards. I just want to go back to something you said about, obviously, behavior is sort of based in, economics is sort of based in behavior. And I really think that, especially what we've seen today with, well, really since he's announced these tariffs, obviously the markets are just trending down. And I suppose if you said that is the markets responding to that behavior. And even we saw today a very brief rally at the end, almost close of most of these markets, where there was this rumor going around that he was going to put a 90-day pause on some of this stuff, and you literally see on the line it go up, and then the second Trump says, "Actually, no, these tariffs are staying. That's just a lie,"
Yeah.
drops back down again. So it's definitely responding to Trump's.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the markets. Right, the markets operate on three things: fear, greed, and uncertainty. So what you've seen so far is that a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago, the markets knew that Liberation Day was coming and the markets fell. The markets, however, didn't know what Mr. Trump was going to say. So until he said it, the markets couldn't absorb that information and reprice equities and the like accordingly. You then see China react and the markets go, whoa, hang on a minute, this is getting doubly dangerous now. How is China going to react? And what we do know is that Mr. Trump has said if anyone reacts against him, he will increase the tariffs even more. Likelihood of war, not sure, not certain. Markets have reacted to uncertainty and they've just dropped. People are de-risking. They're selling equities, they're selling positions out, they're getting out of the markets for fear it's going to go down and down and down. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the markets consistently fall. As the news comes out, or the lack of news comes out, or the fear that news comes out, the markets are just reacting.
I suppose that's one of the key driving factors, because there's been rumors of this week we're going to see more sectoral tariffs on things. So in his big Liberation Day speech, I thought at one point he had actually announced a ban on Australian beef. Because it sure sounded like he'd said, I am banning Australian beef into this country. But the other thing they seem to be constantly talking about is medication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you see a lot of stuff being talked about medication. So I would not be surprised if this week we saw him like slap a tariff on medication coming into America as well. Will he go ahead with it? As you said, it's just all uncertainty and the fear. I think, as you are right, I think it's driving a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I say, you saw that rally where everyone was like, "Oh my god, we're going to get a 90-day reprieve. Maybe we can do some stuff during that 90 days to try and mitigate some of the consequences of these tariff decisions." But no, it's gone straight back down again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been, I think, one shock after another, especially in these markets. And one thing I would certainly want to sort of ask you is, what could happen if things sort of get worse? What should you be looking at, like market wise? What could happen if things start to get worse? I suppose.
Let's what is the man in the street experiencing right now? I mean, he's thinking, oh, wholesale markets, equities, nothing to do with me. But if you've got a pension and you're not drawing it, you might think, well, okay, the value of my pension has now fallen. All those equities, fixed income instruments have downvalued. My pension today is worth 10-15% than it was 2 weeks ago. If you're drawing a pension, however, you're thinking, hang on a minute, particularly for what they call a defined contribution pension, you've got yourself a nice big pot of money, and the onus is on you to decide how long you're going to live and therefore how much you can draw down on an ongoing basis. And if the value of your pension has just fallen, you're thinking, I've got to draw less to last as long as I think I'm going to live. And that makes you feel poor. That makes you feel poor. Again, behavior. If you feel poor, if you lack confidence, if you're not sure about something, what do? You stop spending. So one of the things that's happening is that people stop spending. With the banking crisis, we saw the markets fall through the floor. The banks at the time thought that people would rush away and start spending their savings, looking after themselves, making sure they could continue in an ordinary environment. What happened was the availability of savings went up. People stopped spending and started putting money into the banks, because that's the natural reaction of someone who's a little bit worried about the future. If you don't spend, your manufacturers are thinking, well, what happens here? And you start to move, GDP goes negative, growth goes negative. We're on the cusp of recession. We could go into recession because of it, not just here, but globally. Everyone in the world will react the same. So you feel poorer, you're uncertain. Let's just say, how can I put this? Your job in Vietnam has just been brought back to the US. So the guy in Vietnam's lost his job. He can't spend. And it's that kind of chaos and concern that people have got. So even though the world doesn't come to an end, the fear that the world will come to an end causes people to behave in a particular way. That can result in recession.
So I suppose you're looking more for people then to react to the bad situation. So I say the classic thing obviously would be a run on a bank, but I don't think you're going to get that this time, because it's not the banks that are like being hit this time. It is sort of international trade between companies, between where they get their materials from, where they get parts that go into other stuff they're building, whether they're sending sort of the final product across to another country. And that is, as you say, it's going to raise prices. And what is the link between the markets on that? What's driving it? Is it just the market realization that this is all bad, it's going to lead to higher prices? Why would people not stay in the market and instead leave the market instead, I suppose, would be what we've been seeing today. I suppose that's the real question to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the markets themselves are horribly joined up, and they were back in 2008. So, a subprime mortgage crisis in the southern states of the US suddenly became a global banking crisis, and that morphed into, a PIGS crisis and all sorts of things. We saw Lehman's go bust. We saw HBOS be taken over by Lloyd's. You can never say never. But the banks themselves, since that date, have been regulated and managed and stress tested to death. So the idea that this could result in a banking crisis is, I think, highly unlikely. If anything, the banks themselves are overcapitalized, overly risk averse, and we've seen that more recently where the PRA and the UK government have been trying to wind back a little bit on some of the regulation that they brought in, but it does mean the banks themselves are safe. What we are seeing is where do these tariffs strike another country? So the Lloyd's share price has fallen over the last few days, about half of what Barclays have fallen. Why? Because Lloyd's is a domestic bank. Its business is primarily based in the UK. It has a commercial banking business. Those commercial businesses have international businesses, but it's not a significant part of what Lloyd's is about. Lloyd's, however, is a proxy for the UK economy. And to the extent that the UK is affected by these tariffs, there is shall we say, a knock-on effect in sentiment into the Lloyd's share price. But if you look at HSBC and Barclays, who've got big investment banking divisions, overseas businesses, they'd be much more impacted by this. But then again, not quite so much, because remember, this is a goods tariff, not a services tariff. So the UK, to some extent, is inured from this, partly because it's been, shall we say, given a 10% lower end of the range tariff anyway. The UK's exports into the US represent about 1% of its GDP. The UK is primarily a services-orientated business, and services aren't impacted. So we're in a relatively better position than most. But if you then look at organizations like Rolls-Royce That's a great one. Rolls-Royce over the last couple of years has seen itself recover massively. And only recently, its share price shot up from about £6 to £8 a share. It's collapsed almost back down to £6 a share because it makes aero engines. Aero engines get sold to Boeing. Boeing is an American company, tariff. So that's the way sentiment is hitting these things.
I saw an exploded diagram today of a Boeing airliner, and like so many parts come from different parts of the world, and they all come together in America, and that's simply not going to happen now because the tariffs are just going to blow that all out the water. And it's not just the imposition of the tariffs; it's like the logistics, the bureaucracy of collecting the tariffs. Normally, tariffs are put on commodities, they're not put on countries as a blanket tariff, everything from that country, and it's usually put on products that you make yourself, and you don't want cheap versions of it coming into your country. That's the reason tariffs exist.
Yeah.
It's protectionism. There's no point in us putting tariffs on olives. We can't grow olives in this country. There's literally no point in putting a tariff on it whatsoever because you're not protecting the olive farmers. There aren't any. And you can say the same about coal mining. You say the same about making Nintendos. Like, we don't make Nintendos. So what's the point? You know, we're not competing against that. If we made game systems, maybe, but you'd put it on the commodity. You wouldn't put it on the country. And we put it on the country. And in the most ridiculous equation of all time, which was he took the trade deficit and then he divided that by the amount that they bought off America or something.
Yeah, and it's the EU. They even added
that was a tariff.
Yeah, they even added like VAT.
Yeah,
which is why the EU is so high. It considers that a tariff. It considers that as tax as well.
Got to pay that on domestic products as well. So that makes no sense. And also, like, just the trade disparity, the massive tariff that they put on Lesotho, which just exports diamonds. It's a really poor country, landlocked country in Africa. And of course, they don't buy as many American products as Americans buy off them. It's got a tiny population. America's got a population of 330 million. I mean, everything about this is. It's just like we've put the idiots in charge for some reason and gone there. Let's see what they've done. And this time round, he's got his stabilizers off his little bike, hasn't he? So he's just going around crashing.
Yeah, it is unfettered Trump this time.
The global economy.
But I mean, I've heard people talk so many times about, you know, what is he thinking, and well, the answer is nobody knows what he's thinking. But I do feel that. Inside all this, he made a comment, I think it was yesterday or Friday, where he was saying how people are rushing now to do deals with the US. And it's almost as if what he's trying to do is to take a rather large spoon and stir the pot. And he's trying to see what comes out of it. And long term, I mean, short term, he's going to make some money out of this. He's going to raise tariffs. Short term, he's going to cause considerable pain for Boeing, for the car manufacturers, and for Apple iPhones and the kind, because their products, they can't suddenly change where they manufacture things.
Yeah. It takes a long time to move those.
It takes 10 years to set up a factory and a supply chain. And
but take Nike. Take Nike is a great example, right? Nike makes shoes, running shoes, right? They need leather and they need cotton. Now, you might be able to get cotton in the US still. I don't know. You can certainly get leather in the US still. But they make the shoes overseas in large part. So if they're going to move their production back to the US, they can't create a factory that sews shoes together and then get the leather and cotton from somewhere else in the world because they're going to pay a tariff on it. So they've got to move their sourcing back to the US as well. And this is not going to happen overnight. And I guess I have to assume he knows this. Yeah. And so the plan really is, let's turn the world upside down, see what drops out. Let's be honest, when he says, oh, you know, that's a great deal for the United Kingdom. Well, you can guarantee one thing about Donald Trump: whatever is a great deal for someone else is an even better deal for him. That's where this is sitting, I think. And I think in the short term, I don't think he can keep this going. He may refine it, I don't know, but he will use it as a tool to force countries to do deals with him on his terms, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, you and me, Graham, we've talked about this before on Geoscope on the Friday Night Social. The stuff that Biden passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, all that was based around bringing back manufacturing into the US, and those factories that the Inflation Reduction Act
Yeah.
they're now sort of, you know, being built. Those are now slowly start to come online, and you are seeing manufacturing jobs actually increase under Trump, not because of his tariff plan, but because of that.
Yeah.
Now he's gutted that.
Yeah.
He's gutted that thing.
That was all
He's
passed
gutted
in
the-
2022 when the
Yeah.
Democrats had a majority. Nearly all of the Republicans voted against chips. They voted against the
Yeah.
Inflation Reduction Act, everything that would actually help everyday Americans.
Yeah, the Chips
Mm.
Act as well. He's gutted that as well potentially. That's gonna be very, very damaging, because if he wants to sort of bring back, you know, semiconductor manufacturing into America,
Yeah.
that's how you do it. And yet,
Yeah.
instead of like doubling down on the Chips Act, because that's what he could have done. He could have
Yeah.
doubled down on Biden's Chips Act and go, I'm going to put even more money into this, and you
Yeah.
know, make sure that gets doubled down on even more. But instead, no, I'm just going to go all in for these crazy tariffs and just watch the world burn in many ways. What's the Joker quote? You know, sometimes, you know,
Some people just want to watch the world
Yeah.
burn.
exactly. It just feels like that. It really does
Yeah.
feel like that.
I think one of the things that worries me actually is if you look at the globe, you know, if China, based on what China just did and they reciprocated, that's caused chaos. Now you imagine Japan and South Korea are apparently going to respond jointly. Now they are two very large economies, so that's going to cause markets to hiccup. And we're waiting to see what the EU does. And the EU is a bigger economy than the US. Well, let's see what, and it's it's the uncertainty, it's the noise. So somewhere in the midst of all of this, you know, you've got, all right, we can use the word Brexit, but you've got the UK sitting there in theory, you know, on its own. Is there a benefit for us? Well, I mean, apart from anything else, you know, I kind of look at, well, is Starmer going to put tariffs on goods going into the US or coming in from the US? What's the point? We're just not big enough to do anything that would even, you know, A, we can't hurt the US, and B, we can't really reciprocate against the US. So then you say, well, if we didn't put tariffs on, is there some benefit there for us in terms of creating a free trading environment in the UK? But Trump, the reason we're paying 10% is that Trump's recognizing that if the EU, that's a 34% tariff zone, produces a product that it normally exports directly to the US, but it can now export via the UK and get only a 10% tariff, then he's, well, shall we say, tariff free, shall we say. He's put the 10% tariff in there really to try and capture that scenario. But even so, I mean, from the EU, saving 24% on a product by routing it via the UK has to have some kind of benefit. Now, how does that benefit us? I don't know. This has all got to come through in the wash.
It's a really good point. Another thing they haven't thought about, rules of origin. How much of a product is made somewhere? Usually it's a percentage in all different places. I mean,
well, this is what's happened in Canada when Canada got hit for these 25% tariffs on its car manufacturer. You know, if you look at a car being made, it's the same in Europe. You know, somebody makes the body, somebody makes the seat, somebody makes the dashboard, somebody creates the basic construct of an engine. The engine that gets sent away to be retooled and everything else. And the engine, I think I saw some time ago, an engine made by BMW comes to the UK and back twice. Not once, it comes to the UK, goes back to Germany, comes back to the UK, goes back to Germany. There's tariffs every time. And that's happening between the Canada and the US. The US car manufacturing industry is exporting business to the Canada and then getting it back in again. And it's all just additive. And that's where I don't think he's necessarily thought this through, because the consequences on the US companies, I think, is huge. You can see that with Nike, you can see that with Apple. Elon Musk is suddenly very keen on 0% tariffs. His car manufacturing business has collapsed 5.5% today, but it's been coming down for a long time because of competition from China anyway. He does not need this. Electric car production, with the tariffs at the end of the day, he can survive because he only sells his cars into the US. Everyone else will tariff him off the planet. including China, but no one else will be able to put their cars into the US because they're tariffed out of the US as well. So Elon Musk is selling his cars to America only.
Mm.
And as someone, there was a great video going around with Ronald Reagan at a time when, you know, global free trade was the new thing. It was the coming thing. And he was talking about the consequences of tariffs, and it's not good. It inhibits competition. It inhibits innovation. It makes management lazy. You don't cut costs as much as you would do. This doesn't help the customer at the end of the day. And if nothing else, I think you'll see if people do not export product into the US consumer will have less choice. Simply less choice. I mean, isn't this what the world is all about? Really, it's about choice. And the other thing that does worry me a little bit, I'm putting a bit of a Brexit hat back on this again, but if you take the view that one of the reasons the UK left the EU was that it wanted to remove itself from a zone in which there was political influence in the UK, then what does cutting a deal with the US bring? Donald Trump isn't just going to cut a free trade deal with the UK.
No.
What else does he want? And we're seeing this already with him sort of like interfering in free speech in the UK. And all that's a bit rich because there are people trying to get into the UK with the appropriate documentation, with the right visas, who, irrespective of that, are being picked up, turned around and sent back places without recourse to the courts. And yet he's coming to us talking about free speech outside abortion clinics. It's double standards all the way through. But, you know, as it comes back to quite simply, he's got the biggest stick.
I saw a clip of Bill Burr being interviewed, and he was talking about, you know, he said, these billionaires, you know, this guy's got $1 billion, and he's like, I'm not happy, and the system's got to change. The system's broken, and it's like, you're a billionaire, you've done quite well out of it. And I feel the same way with these global markets. Like, America is the richest and most powerful nation on the planet. And they're going, we've been sorely done by, we've been raped and pillaged by everyone's taking the mick out of us. And I was like, you know what? If they had an empire and they'd lost the empire and now they're in the 99th richest country in the world, maybe you'd have a bit of an argument. But it's by far the richest country in the world with the most powerful military and the most global presence of any country in the world. You can walk for 2 days down a dirt track in Africa and you will find a bottle of Coca-Cola at the end of it. It is insane how they have managed to put themselves into every market in every country in the world, with the possible exception of the Heard and McDonald Islands.
Well, I think what you're alluding to there is soft power.
Yeah.
You know? And this seems to me that the whole, making Europe pay for its own defense, I get that. It's a non-starter. But at the same time, when you're the guy paying most money and you've got the checkbook, you can kind of tell people what to do. And the influence around that is huge. And he doesn't seem to recognize that if Europe does build a defense industry, if Europe does build the walls, tariff walls against the USA, if the world trades away from the USA, which is one of the long-term implications here, that people simply won't sell into the USA, and the rest of the world becomes very rich off the back of that. And suddenly, isn't Mr. Trump then wanting to make a big comeback and say, well, how do we change all of this? Because we need to make America great again. But he's not done that. He's insulated America from the rest of the world where all the money is, and people have traded away from him, which is kind of where I think it will ultimately go.
Yeah.
There's a very short-term thing here and a very long-term thing. And this is why I have this sense of, does he have the attention span to do something that creates a very long-term consequence? Or is he simply trying to swing a stick and see what drops out of the tree that benefits him and the US in the short term? Because the guy's only got 4 years, 3.5 years to go. He can't we think. Well, I've seen. But you
thought that about Vladimir Putin back in the 2000s.
Yes.
Really, yeah.
But, in all seriousness, whoever is president next will not change everything that Trump's done. There seems to be a groundswell of opinion that there are elements of what he's doing that is right for the US. But I think when people do think it through properly, the only way in which the US can truly succeed is to become highly competitive in a lot of areas. And when you have a large market like the US and you start out as Mr. Joe Corner Shop, and your corner shop becomes a 52 state retail business, and you are worth tens of billions of pounds, and you've not yet left the US. You're not started exporting yet. So you've got this terrific business that's grown off a domestic consumer, which we just cannot compete with in the UK. 330 million people versus 80, 75 million people. It's not the same. And businesses in the US, for that reason, have almost got a leg up before they go anywhere.
Yeah, largest market always wins.
Oliver, you're looking very depressed here. How's your
What a time to be alive.
to be perfectly honest, going back to the markets, I mean, we've seen. I think it was when I was studying for Treasury. There's a concept called a Six Sigma event, where once every 10,000 years you will have a major disaster. All right. And there's a business called Long-Term Capital Management built itself on this basis, and eventually it went bust very quickly because of other reasons. But we've had Y2K, we've had the Russian banking crisis, the Asian banking crisis, the global banking crisis. We've had COVID, we've had the supply chain problem, we've had the Ukraine war, we've had the pigs. How many Six Sigma events can we put up with that haven't happened in the next 10,000 years? These things come along quite often, and very often you just have to grip your pants and go for the ride.
Now, I suppose what you're saying there is we've seen Keir Starmer adopt the war game strategy, I suppose you could call it. The best move to play is do nothing. Whether he will respond in any way or not, I suppose we'll see over the next coming days. I suppose same for the EU. But you are right. The only country to really respond to this has been China, that have sort of clapped back with 34% extra tariffs on top of what.
I've heard Trump has said he's going to put a 50% extra tariff on China, which will take up their tariffs to 104%.
Yeah. I suppose it comes down to now it becomes a chicken contest, I suppose, at the end of the day. And if there is to be any deal to be done or anything like that, it'll come down to, as the saying goes, who has the most cards. It'll either be the American consumer or it'll be the Chinese supplier.
But I think at the end of the day,
that's where the leverage comes from that
it's
deal.
not just China, though, is it?
But ultimately, nobody ends up having enough cards. You might have more cards than the other guy, but the pain along the way to you is enormous. And it's one of these things. If your objective is to win, but end up impoverished, the other guy's dead, of course, but you're impoverished. Was it worth it? And we saw the 1929 stock market crash ran into a recession, ran into tariffs being put up in place, and eventually everyone unwound them because they realized it doesn't work. It just causes pain. And yes, I'm old enough to remember ships being built in Scotland, and the shipbuilding industry went to Japan. From Japan, it went to Korea. From Korea, it went to Malaysia. From Malaysia, it's gone to China. From China, it's heading towards Vietnam. And one day, shipbuilding will come back to Scotland. This is a bit of a sort of like a jokey way of looking at it. But the day it does, that's when the world is on a level playing field, because everything's gone full circle. Money and manufacturing follows the cheapest source of production. That's all the American businesses have done. He's reversing that trend, forcing businesses back into the US. And it might work in the short term, but the profit motive is highly efficient. People to move shipbuilding from China to Vietnam, Malaysia, all these kinds of things, huge costs involved, but it chases profit, and it's a way of looking at efficiency for that. And if you create a walled market in which there is no competition, it gives rise to laziness, poor practices, low product quality. All those good things start to seep into businesses through a lack of serious competition.
Soviet Union.
Yeah. and you've kind of seen this in the Ukraine Russian war, where a lot of the Russian army is almost inept in parts. They've made some huge mistakes. They've not had the right equipment, all sorts of things, and that's the consequences of not having a competitive market.
Yeah,
and that's what tariffs ultimately do to you.
Sorry, go on.
I finished.
I was going to say to Ollie, yeah, it's not just China though, is it? Because it's the US versus the world. And this weekend we saw that picture of the representatives of China, South Korea, and Japan, holding hands like. If I'm a student of history, so I've had my mind blown by this, and they're working together in the face of these Trump tariffs to work together to increase free trade between those three countries. That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible, and it's why the US will lose. They will, because there's more of us than there is of them. They are a very big player in the world, but they're not the only one.
Stuff saying that China and the EU are already reaching out to each other, start talks on something.
My prediction, by the end of Trump's term, whether that ends with him in a box or he gets voted out or whatever, I think that America's not going to be the number one in the world anymore with its economy. I think it's going to be China, then possibly Japan, then possibly India.
Yeah. Well, always remember.
One thing is certain though about that. It won't be Mr. Trump's fault.
Oh no, it'll be the immigrants. It'll be the trans women. It'll be the trans athletes that came and stole our economy.
Sorry, you were going to say.
Our fifth place trophies.
One of the interesting things I think might happen over this, one of the big reasons why we were put into the Pacific Partnership, especially by Japan, was we were there ever in case that China might want to join the Pacific Partnership, because they'd let other countries from Asia in, and there was now this worry that these other countries might approve China if they ever came knocking. So there's a chance now China may go, hey, can we join the Pacific Partnership?
Yeah,
and that sort of undermined one of the key reasons why sort of Japan was desperate to get us into the Pacific Partnership.
But I'm a bit nervous about all this, because I come back to a point I made a little bit earlier on. There are three great trading blocks in the world: the US, China, and EU. And the rest of us, yes, the UK is the sixth largest economy in the world, but a long way behind everyone else. And one of the nice things about that trading block you were talking about is that a lot of nobody's predominantly bigger than anybody else, And for China to join that trading block would mean you suddenly have a huge trading partner that maybe wants to move the political agenda of that. And that's what you don't particularly want. You want ultimately free trade, cooperation, and that's it. And let everyone get on with their own domestic business their own way.
I suppose the other thing as well is, because we mentioned this about businesses, and I get the feeling that you've had all these sell-offs in the stock market. That money's going to be going somewhere, and I get the feeling a lot of businesses are going to end up sitting on that money. Because if potentially Trump's only got 3.5 years left, do you just wait Trump out and make some very, very token investments into America to placate him and keep him happy, and then you hope, or you start giving a lot of money to Democrats in the upcoming American election in the hope to try and sort of get him out again. What do you think to that possibility of businesses maybe just I
don't think you can think like that, because another Republican could get the presidency, and it could be J.D. Vance. But equally, remember that when you look at Republicans and Democrats, they don't translate to conservatives and Labour. The Democrats are somewhere to the right of the conservatives sometimes in many respects. And if the US, if there is a Democratic president that comes into the US, there is still that voter base that's MAGA, that still wants certain things. And it could well be that the new Democratic president pursues some of these Trumpian policies still. So you can't do that. the other point you made was about, well, people sell out of positions. What they do, they sit on the cash. They find somewhere to place the cash. They can buy short-term money market instruments. They can buy gilts, treasuries, all sorts of things. An interesting thing said today in the paper was quite interesting. China could actually blow America up completely because it holds something around 700, I don't know if it's billion or trillion dollars of US debt. The US is a net debtor in the world. It needs people to buy. It's borrowing money, and it needs to go and find where to borrow money from. And it's borrowed a lot of money from Japan and China. And if those two countries decided to dump that debt on the market, they don't even have to do that. They just don't. Some of this debt's quite short term. They just don't refinance it. When America comes back, I borrowed money for 3 months. Can I borrow it again in 3 months' time?
Yeah.
And when that money starts to dry up, that's when Trump finds that the borrowings in the Fed, he'd better have sacked a lot of people.
Yeah.
He'd better have sacked a lot of people to not suffer the consequences of having to refinance that money. But the consequences on China are just the same. They're huge. Sorry, please.
No, I just looked it up. I mean, there's a couple of different figures, but China's looking at about 750 billion that's what it holds of American government bonds, essentially. It's the second largest holder. The largest holder is Japan.
Yeah.
And they have over $1 trillion that they could just, not refinance, get rid of.
I suppose that's the nuclear option. Really.
But Ollie, there's another point in this about the whole "it's not fair" nonsense. This is just goods. America runs a surplus when it comes to services. So Netflix and Apple, the actual software side of things, Google, Facebook, Meta, all that stuff, that they make an absolute fortune and sell it all around the world, and it's tariff free, and it just. I just hate the idea of someone who's like so rich and so powerful going, I'm being treated so unfairly with this whole like victim complex. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic.
And we have been going over for sort of 40 minutes now. So I do want to sort of take some more questions from the chat. So obviously we'll just talk about something else before as those questions start to come in. But like I say, put your questions in the chat. We'll sort of put them to our expert here. So for those of you coming in late, this is actually my uncle. You've had, what was it, 52 years in the banking world?
Whoa, Ollie.
Was that 152 years? I had 40 years experience in the financial world with first half in mortgages, etc., second half in wholesale markets, and having gone through the banking crisis and seeing what's come through afterwards. The UK is a very, very stable financial market for sure. Nobody needs, I don't think, to be worried about a run on the banks.
No, I've been saying on my channel I'm not particularly concerned about that, but I am concerned about our manufacturing, such as it is British Steel, what the government's going to do with that. But I mean, just as a question, whether you got any ideas of what the silver lining is for the UK, for Europe, apart from closer cooperation with our friends and neighbours and allies and stuff like that. But is there anything good that's going to come from this?
I'd like to think the flip side of what we were talking about, inefficiencies caused by tariffs, but equally there are efficiencies caused by being blocked out of markets and finding ways to compete. And I think in some respects, the UK, we're not very big, right? And we provide and produce quite a wide variety of things, which is great. And we trade in an open world, which is great. But some of the basics, like, AI needs a huge amount of power, right? So who's building the new power stations that will power these services that use AI? And Rolls-Royce is in the market for doing small nuclear reactors. It's amazing how under the climate change nuclear is suddenly a much more nicer thing to have than it used to be by a long shot. But I think the UK, you can't be everything to everybody. You can't compete against the US. So you have to find the things that you can compete at. We are very good at IT we're very good at pharmaceuticals, very good at high-end technology. And that's where this country needs to go and do the deals with other countries. You know, there was a thing in the papers today, you know, what proportion of a nuclear submarine coming out of Dunblane in Scotland is British steel? Not a lot of it. The steel comes from France. We've got to work with other countries to produce these things. So, tariffs at the end of the day work wonderfully well for a country that does everything. But even America doesn't do everything.
Yeah. I mean, and what's the point of doing? What is the point of America making sneakers or T-shirts, like something that is, you know, high yield, low profit? Just what is the point? I just don't get it. It's like there's loads of American workers going, "Oh, if only I could just work on a production line, like picking up a sneaker and putting it on another conveyor belt. I wish I could have that job."
Well, I hate to blow you up here, but there is an economic principle, and I'm going back to my A-levels economics now. But if country A produces 2 products and country B produces 2 products, and they trade with each other, well, the point is, if country A produces 2 products, both of which are more efficiently produced than country B, why would they trade together? And there is an answer. It's all about relativity. So the US, you'll always have someone in the US who wants to create something, a T-shirt, and it may not be the T-shirt itself. It's the image on the front of the T-shirt that portrays some kind of cultural more. And then, you know, people want to buy that T-shirt from them, even though it's £15 from them and £2.50 from Vietnam. There's always reasons for this.
Yeah, I suppose that comes into our very first question from One Angry Pagan, who says, could the UK actually gain on the manufacturing front if we create some kind of trade alliance with Canada, the EU, etc.? I think that's possible. I've talked before this about on Geoscope and on here and again on the Friday Night Social, and with the guys from the Bin podcast. Go give them a subscribe, by the way, if you haven't already. Yeah, we talked about the fact that Canada now has all that oil and gas, where it used to send it through to the US to get processed. If we build the infrastructure on the East Coast to get it over here, we could refine it up in the refineries in Scotland.
Which
that's what we should be looking at now.
So that's coming through on a pipeline. I mean, putting that on ships and bringing it over the Atlantic.
Yeah, I don't know if you could put no pipeline.
Because we get most of our non-domestic oil from Norway, and clearly it's the closest place. I mean,
yeah, I mean that would be something else to look at. A pipeline between the UK.
Those oil rigs, like next door neighbours, they can wave from one to the other. One's Norwegian and one's ours. But yeah, I mean there's plenty of new opportunities that will arise because of this, but it doesn't mean there's new consumers. It doesn't mean people around the world will suddenly have more money to spend on British stuff. We're not going to make massive inroads into countries in Africa, I don't think, as a result of these tariffs.
A lot of people talked about capacity, and the capacity issues are going to become a big thing. Yeah,
but I'm looking forward to sort of pivoting a bit more back towards our brothers and sisters in the rest of Europe. So fingers crossed.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think one of the potential consequences to come out of all of this is that if the EU, let's say the world trades away from America, and let's say the EU is a big winner from that, but if you want to trade with the EU and you are India, you've got to achieve some very high hurdles to get through, and that doesn't give you full access to the EU either. You've got to be part of the EU and have a common agricultural policy and all the things that the UK came away with. You know, the EU's, if you want to think of it this way, the EU has got a lot of non-financial tariffs protecting business. And this is one of the gripes that Trump's got. You can't export chlorine-washed chicken into the UK. Why? We just don't let them out. You can't. That's a complete wall. That's not 100% tariff. That's 1,000% tariff, And if there was 1,000% tariff, someone would still sell a chlorinated chicken into the UK, I'm sure of it. So it's total blockage. And there's a lot of that happens with the EU. And this is what, open and fair trade is really all about. The EU, from what I've read, does have a poor track record of negotiating trade agreements with non-EU zone countries.
I mean, the one with Canada's been tied up for about 10 years now.
Yeah. And
But it is in place. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like they're still
but it's just been
negotiating.
going on for 10
But
years.
it's just there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna, like I say, most tariffs just aren't on a country. They're on the different commodities that are coming out of there, and you've got to keep the farmers of Wallonia, like you've got to keep them happy as well, because they've got to say everyone.
This is why I've said
it's
we should start
consensual.
doing like sectoral deals with Canada, like one thing at a time.
Yeah. Well, we have to.
If you create a free trade zone made up of Canada and South Africa and New Zealand and Australia and the UK and the EU and all these good places, then you have one tariff, and that tariff is a complete wall against the US. You block the US out completely from this huge market, which, let's be honest, the rest of the world is bigger than the US. That might come as a shock, but it is.
So, to any Americans watching,
yeah. So I guess final thoughts then, as we come up to the end of this. Any predictions? And I know I spoke to you before about how you're sort of hesitant to sort of make predictions, but what do we think might happen? What might we might see in the next sort of maybe the next couple of months, maybe the next year, something like that?
Well, in the short term, watch out for Japan and Korea. Then watch out for the EU. Then watch out for India. And just see what the reaction is. And if everyone starts to throw tariffs against the US, then we've got a full-on war. And that's seriously worrying. Because then what you get is Trump will then double his tariffs with everyone else, and off we go. And then it's the law of unintended consequences, and people start to understand. Going back to the banking crisis in 2008, it took a couple of years before people had fully worked through all the knock-on effects and all the consequences of everything that happened and understood it. And the same will happen here. In the wholesale markets, I talked about fear, greed, and uncertainty. But remember, we're looking at equities, and you've got interest rate swaps, you've got futures, you've got options. People sell short, they sell all kinds of things. You may get people at the moment who they're very brave at buying equities at the moment. But if you buy today and the markets are down 5% and they're down another 5% tomorrow, you're left wearing egg on your face. But longer term, I do feel that longer term, what we're going to see is, I think Trump will pull back from this, having achieved what he thinks in his own mind he has achieved. I don't necessarily think Trump tariffs will disappear altogether, but you may get more agreements being made, and a blind eye will be turned for one country, because that one country can give the US something that another country can't give. And that's what Trump, I think, is ultimately after. Now, whether we can invite him to the UK, sit him down for dinner with Charles, and he comes out and said, guys, I've just come up with this great idea. What about zero tariffs between the US and the UK? I don't know. I don't somehow think he's going to do that.
Zero tariffs, like you said, it's not just about, because we don't really have tariffs against the US, but we do have bans on chlorinated chicken and hormone injected beef and all that kind of stuff. We have a ban. We can't make it in this country, and we don't accept it coming in from anywhere else.
Yeah.
And he's going to say, no, you've got to get rid of that. Plus, you've got to allow people to protest outside abortion clinics, and and start interfering with our domestic policies, our domestic laws in this country, our freedom of speech, our freedom to privacy. And he wants to take off the digital tax that came on in 2020 on like Meta and the other online platform providers. And it's only like a 2% tax anyway, and they make billions. They pay hardly anything in tax. He wants us to get rid of that. And it's all, everything with Trump is transactional. It's always got to be a deal. It's always got to be, you do this, quid pro quo is the name of the game. Even back in his first term, when he tried to first muscle Zelensky about funds that had already been allocated to Ukraine for military defense, clearly it needed. And he was saying, no, you find me dirt on Joe Biden's son, or you're not getting them. I mean, but they voted him back in, so my patience with Americans in general is pretty at an all-time low at the moment.
Yes.
But the world's changing, and 20 years ago we didn't see China the way we see them today. And in the next 10 to 20 years, the world will be a very different place. So when you're thinking in terms of what are the long-term consequences of tariffs, well, don't be blindsided by the fact that other things are happening in the world that we're not necessarily seeing, and the impact of AI, the emergence of India as a global economy. I think what we've seen, particularly in relation to the Ukraine-Russia war, is that what you would call the non-aligned countries, for the first time, have had a policy almost of not being in support of the East or the West, and yet just buy cheap Russian oil, whatever, and indifferent. And I do think that we are seeing a fight at the moment potentially between East and West, but that's bifurcating and trifurcating. And oddly enough, in 5 years' time, you'll be looking at tariffs, and there'll be some other issue that is causing concern. And there will be other Six Sigma events for sure. What we are experiencing is not a volatile world, but an increasingly volatile world. Yep. And it's finding your path in between all of that. And that comes with smaller countries like the UK aligning itself with kindred spirits and working with people, whether it's inside a bloc or outside a bloc. I think with NATO, with the EU, the UK's got, it's a strong economy. It's got very sophisticated education, military, cultural, etc. And we're surrounded by other good countries like that. So, working with Norway, Denmark, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, come back the empire.
Yeah. It does. I've heard a lot of people say that about, oh, well, maybe this is the time to reach out to our, our former, friends in the,
well, there was a very similar
Commonwealth friends necessarily for those days. But we got the Commonwealth. 56 countries. There were countries that are in the Commonwealth that weren't even in the British Empire.
Like there was a similar rumour where Trump wanted to join the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
I think that's because he didn't know what it was.
Yeah, but maybe he joins the Commonwealth and we all get free trade.
Yeah,
maybe that's the answer. I don't know. We're being silly now, but
yeah. Well, hey, who knows what he'll do next?
Yeah.
Honestly, in the long run, this might be a good thing. I might get all over my face. It's always play this back in years to come to say, when we're living in a post-apocalyptic world. But our reliance on America isn't just about military stuff. It's also they make our movies. All of our movies are, our stories, IP from this country gets made in America, or at least with American cash.
Yeah,
if they force us to make that stuff ourselves, then all right.
We make the best comedy shows, though.
Yeah, we do.
I mean,
maybe make them badly.
What Canada does, they actually have a mandate that you have to have so much Canadian content played on radios and TV.
Yeah, France does the same.
France is the same. Maybe we should follow suit on that.
I think my view on that. I think it depends on how confident you are in your own culture. I think the UK culture is strong enough to fight its own corner with a lot of this.
Yeah,
it really is. And this is where the big debate around the BBC license fee comes in.
I got time for that.
When you look at pop music, you look at theatre and all these kind of things. UK culture is immense. Scottish culture is immense. Irish culture is immense. And we've got nothing to fear culturally from anybody, I don't think.
Yeah. So on that, like I say, thank you both for joining me. Thank you very much. I think we've had a very, very sort of good sort of discussion and talk. But thank you everyone else for joining us in the chat. Sorry that I wasn't too attentive to you all. I know we only got through one of the questions, but thank you very much for everyone who's joined us this evening. Thank you very much to all the badges in chat as well. Like I say, One Angry Pagan in the Pony Club. Thank you very much. Badges in the Pony Club. Thank you very much for that as well. So as always, you'll probably see me and Graham tomorrow on Geoscope.
I've got Stateside at 9 o'clock tonight.
Oh yeah, stateside as well. Yeah, so you'll probably be talking more about this as well.
Yeah. Oh, you're just repeating everything we just said.
Yeah. So yeah, go join them tomorrow or tonight on Stateside. Come join us tomorrow on Geoscope, where we'll talk about probably more about what China responded with, on that, all the fun stuff that's probably on
going under the radar a bit because Trump's sucking up all the
Yeah, unfortunately, but that's just the world we're in, unfortunately, isn't it? So,
Come on, Oliver.
thank you very much. to my
Oliver,
uncle.
it's your bedtime, man. Come on, go to bed.
Yeah, thank you very much to my uncle as well for joining us and on this conversation as well. But thank you very much as well.
And just one thing, apologies to the Welsh for not mentioning Welsh culture.
Oh yeah,
Welsh culture is awesome.
Yeah. And of course, do remember to click the like and share button on your way out. There are links down below as well. You know all the drill by now. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.